This episode of Peppa Pig was never shown on TV and is a deleted episode of the animated series The Nightmare Dimension Night had settled over Peppa Pig's house, and everything seemed normal. The moon cast a soft glow through the window. George was quietly snoring in his little bed, and in the distance, the gentle creaking of the floorboards marked the steps of their parents. It was just another peaceful night, but when Peppa opened her eyes, everything was wrong. The room looked different. Instead of the familiar yellow wallpaper, the walls were dark and cracked. The window no longer showed green hills and a bright sun. Beyond it was only endless, thick fog, glowing faintly with an eerie red light. The air carried a strange scent, like the aftermath of rain, but mixed with something metallic. George had woken up too. His bed seemed taller and narrower, as if the walls had shifted. His toy dinosaur, which had been brand new yesterday, now looked old and covered in dust. The house was unrecognizable. The floorboards groaned too loudly, the hallway stretched longer than it should, and the paintings on the walls, paintings that had never been there before, depicted faceless figures. A heavy silence filled the air, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water, though there was no water in sight. Something moved in the kitchen. Slow, heavy footsteps echoed in the darkness. A tall shadow appeared in the doorway. Its outline was familiar, resembling Daddy Pig. But something was wrong. It didn't move like Daddy. Its eyes glowed with a cold, white light, and its breath sounded like a distant wind sweeping through an empty void. The walls whispered. The voices were faint, as if they came from the house itself. They called out, offering warmth, a cozy dinner, a place to stay. But there was something deeply unsettling in their tone. Through the fog outside, another shadow flickered. It moved in unnatural, jerky motions, like a broken puppet. Something was here, watching, waiting. Peppa gripped George's hand tightly and took a step back. The world around them was changing. The walls seemed to pulse as if they were alive, and the air grew heavier. They had to run. But where? And was there even a way out of this nightmare dimension? Peppa Pig, lost episode, the new one. One morning, Peppa woke up, and there was someone else in the room. He was sitting on the bed beside George, about their age. His skin was pale, almost gray. He didn't move or speak, but when Peppa stood up, he looked at her and smiled, as if he had been waiting. Everything else was ordinary: the bright morning light, the familiar bedroom, the smell of breakfast. Except this new child, unknown, uninvited, behaved as though he had always lived there. In the kitchen, 3 bowls were already set on the table. Mummy Pig served breakfast without a hint of confusion. Daddy Pig flipped through his newspaper. George laughed and ate his porridge. Everyone carried on as if nothing had changed. The new child ate with them. Throughout the day, Peppa watched. He helped set the table. He played with George. He sat with Daddy Pig. He drew pictures. His name was Ralphie. Everyone said it so casually, so naturally, as if he had always been part of the family. But Peppa didn't remember him. Not from yesterday, not from last week, not from ever. She checked the family photo albums. Ralphie was in all of them, standing beside George, holding hands, sitting on Daddy Pig's lap. Where Peppa used to be, now he was, as if she had been carefully cut out and replaced. On the second day, the bedroom changed. Peppa's bed was pushed into the corner. Her things began to vanish. Clothes, toys, even her books. In their place were new objects. Gray, unfamiliar, lifeless. No scent, no name, no memory. The family talked to each other, smiled, lived their lives. But none of them looked at Peppa. Sometimes their gaze passed near her, but never directly. She tried to make herself known, with movement, with noise, with presence, but was met only with silence, or worse, polite indifference. Only Ralphie looked directly at her, for long moments, without blinking. He never blinked, and his smile, always the same, whether he was eating, playing, or simply sitting still. He knew. By the third day, her name was never spoken. No one called her for meals. No one asked where she was. George laughed only with Ralphie. Mummy Pig stroked his head when he passed. Daddy Pig read bedtime stories to 2 children. On the 4th morning, Peppa's bed was gone. The room now had only 2 beds, George's and Ralphie's. Her belongings had disappeared completely. There were no traces. The only photo on the wall showed 4 figures: Ralphie, George, Mummy Pig, and Daddy Pig. The caption beneath it read, "Our family." The mirror reflected the empty room. Ralphie and George played on the floor. Peppa stood in the doorway, but her reflection wasn't there. The house looked the same, but inside it, another story had begun. One where Peppa had never existed. That night, she simply faded. No sound, no trace, no goodbye. The next morning, someone carefully closed her old sketchbook. On the last page was a drawing. 2 children, a mother and a father. 4 simple shapes. No names, no Peppa. This episode of the animated series Peppa Pig has never been shown on TV. Peppa Pig, not the real Grandpa. The day was overcast. Gray clouds hung low over the pig family's house, muting the sunlight. A strange silence filled the air, broken only by the occasional rustling of the wind outside. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig were preparing for Grandpa Pig's arrival. Peppa and George ran excitedly around the house, eagerly waiting for him. Soon there was a knock at the door. They rushed to open it. Grandpa Pig stood on the doorstep, but he looked different. His eyes were too light, his skin too pale, and his smile too stiff. He stepped inside slowly, fluidly, as if he wasn't entirely in control of his own movements. When he spoke, his voice sounded distant, hollow. Mummy Pig gave him a worried glance but said nothing. The day passed uneasily. Grandpa Pig barely ate. He just sat at the table watching Peppa and George without blinking. His movements were unnatural, sometimes too abrupt, other times too slow, as if he were adjusting to his surroundings. Night fell. The children went to bed, but Peppa couldn't sleep. A sound came from outside her room, a soft shuffling. She peeked into the hallway. Grandpa Pig stood in the darkness. He wasn't moving, just slowly tilting his head from side to side, as if listening. And then Peppa noticed something terrifying. His shadow didn't match his body. It moved differently. When he took a step forward, his shadow lagged behind before copying him a second later. Peppa's breath caught in her throat. Grandpa froze as if he had heard her. And then, his face began to change. His skin tightened, his eyes darkened, and his smile stretched too wide. Bits of his flesh began to peel away, like an old mask crumbling. Underneath, there was something else. Something thin, distorted, wrong. It took a step toward her. Peppa slammed the door shut. Outside, a low, dragging scrape echoed down the hall, as if something was running long, sharp fingers across the wood. Then, silence. But Peppa knew that thing was still there. It wasn't leaving. The wrong voices. The morning started as usual. Peppa woke up, stretched, and listened to the familiar sounds of the house. The smell of breakfast drifted from the kitchen. George was already playing with his dinosaur, and birds were singing outside the window. Everything felt peaceful and normal. She went downstairs, took her seat at the table, picked up her spoon, and was just about to start eating when she heard Mummy Pig calling her name. The voice came from upstairs, from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. That was strange. Mummy Pig was standing right in front of her, making breakfast. Peppa froze, gripping her spoon tightly. She looked at her mother, but she didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Daddy Pig, calmly reading his newspaper, didn't react either. The voice called again. It was exactly like her mother's, warm, gentle, familiar. But why was it coming from somewhere it shouldn't be? Slowly, she put her spoon down, glanced at her parents one more time, and hesitantly walked toward the stairs. As she climbed up, the house felt quieter than usual. The hallway looked the same as always, but something felt off. She took another step forward, and the voice called again. This time, it was coming from behind the door of her own bedroom. Peppa swallowed hard. A chilling thought crept into her mind. If Mummy Pig was here, downstairs, then who was calling her from inside her room? She hesitated, then placed her hand on the doorknob. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. The voice had stopped, but now she could hear something else. Breathing, slow, heavy, not hers. The doorknob twitched slightly under her fingers, as if someone inside was trying to open it. Peppa yanked her hand away and stumbled backward. At that moment, Mummy Pig's voice called her again from the kitchen, asking why she was taking so long. Peppa glanced toward the stairs, her fingers trembling. When she turned back to her door, a shadow slipped out from underneath it. She didn't wait to see what it was. She turned and ran. At breakfast, no one called for her again. Mummy, Daddy, and George ate, talked, and laughed as usual. Peppa sat silently, trying to convince herself that it had all been in her imagination. But the next day, when she heard her name again, the voice was coming from inside her closet. Peppa Pig. Lost episode, The Growing Dinosaur. It all started on an ordinary morning. Peppa woke up and noticed George's plush dinosaur, Mr. Dino, standing right next to her bed. It was staring straight at her. George said maybe it had moved there on its own during the night. Peppa just snorted. He probably just played with it before bed and forgot. The next day, the dinosaur looked different. Its plastic eyes seemed shinier, almost wet. The teeth, sharper, and Peppa could have sworn it had grown a little taller. George said proudly that Mr. Dino was growing. He seemed proud. That night, Peppa woke up to a deep, dragging sound in the dark. Something heavy was moving inside their shared bedroom. She thought George was playing again, but when she turned, George was asleep, and Mr. Dino was gone from its usual spot. In the morning, the toy stood between their beds. Now it was nearly as tall as George. The stitching along its side had started to split. Something inside was shifting. From then on, George began to change. He stopped playing with Peppa. He stayed in their room, whispering to the dinosaur, feeding it real food. He said it talked to him. He said it would protect him from the ones who come at night. He wouldn't say who they were. Mummy Pig grew worried. That night, she quietly took Mr. Dino and hid it in the attic. But by dawn, the house was filled with strange noises, scratching, thudding, slow, heavy footsteps. The next morning, the attic door was torn off its hinges. Mr. Dino was back between the children's beds. But now it nearly touched the ceiling. Its eyes were no longer plastic. They moved. Peppa tried to tell her parents the toy was alive, that it was watching them, but no one believed her. George clung to the dinosaur and whispered, "He's real now. He'll never leave me." That night, Peppa woke up to a cracking noise. At first, she thought it was just the wind. Then she heard George call her name. But the voice wasn't his. It was deeper, slower. The light in their room flickered, then silence. And with a slam, the door locked itself from the inside. When the parents finally opened the door the next morning, the beds were empty. No Peppa, no George, only long claw marks on the floor. The wallpaper was torn, and the dinosaur, far too big to be a toy anymore, was gone. On the floor lay a small blanket and a child's drawing. It showed a towering green dinosaur holding the hands of two small pigs, and in the corner of the room, a faint message had been scratched into the wall. "He's not a toy anymore. Now he's with us."